Tom had always loved the quiet of his property. Nestled on the edge of a small, peaceful town, it was the perfect place for him to escape from the noise of everyday life. His most treasured spot was the lake that sat just behind his house. It was a small, serene body of water surrounded by tall trees, where he could go for a swim whenever he needed to clear his mind. Tom had inherited the land from his late uncle, who had also enjoyed the solitude of the lake. When Tom moved in, he quickly settled into a peaceful routine, waking up early to enjoy the calm of the mornings and the coolness of the water. He wasn't bothered by the town's rules or any neighborhood complaints because his property was separate from the homes nearby. One bright, sunny afternoon, Tom decided to take a swim. The air was warm, the water inviting. As he dove in, he felt a sense of freedom, the kind only a private lake could offer. He swam along the shore, enjoying the quiet, the only sound being the gentle ripple of water against the bank. But this time, something was different. As Tom swam closer to the shore, he noticed a figure standing near the tree line, watching him. It was Karen, the head of the local homeowners association, HOA. She had always been a bit of a busybody in the neighborhood, and Tom had never had much to do with her. She was known for her strict rules and her obsession with enforcing them, even on people who didn't live in the HOA's jurisdiction. Karen had a stern look on her face, her arms crossed over her chest as she waited for Tom to approach. He swam toward the shore, wondering what she was doing on his property. As Tom pulled himself out of the water, Karen wasted no time in speaking. "You know," she said, her voice sharp, "you're not allowed to swim in this lake." Tom raised an eyebrow, surprised. "I'm not allowed to swim in my own lake." Karen nodded, her eyes narrowing. "It's against HOA rules. The lake is part of the community, and you're violating the guidelines by swimming here." Tom shook his head, laughing slightly. "I'm not part of the HOA. This lake is on my property. I'm not a member of the HOA, and I don't follow their rules." Karen didn't budge. "Doesn't matter. You're still violating the community guidelines. It's disruptive for others, and you're causing a disturbance." Tom's smile faded. "Karen, I don't know where you're getting this from, but I don't care about your HOA rules. I've lived here for years, and I've always used this lake. I don't know why this is an issue now." Karen's eyes flashed with annoyance. "Well, you should care. I'm telling you that you can't use the lake like this. I'll report you to the HOA board if I have to." Tom was taken aback. He had no idea why Karen was making such a fuss. The HOA had never had any control over his property. It was clear she was just trying to make a point, and it frustrated him. But instead of arguing further, he took a deep breath and decided to end the conversation. "Look, Karen," he said, trying to stay calm. "I don't want to get into this with you. This is my land, and I'm going to enjoy it however I want. If you have a problem with that, you can take it up with the right people. But I'm not going to entertain this nonsense any longer." Karen stood there for a moment, her mouth tightening as she stared at him. "Fine," she said coldly. "But don't think this is over. I'll be reporting this. You'll be hearing from the HOA." Tom watched as she turned and walked away, her heels clicking on the ground. He couldn't believe what had just happened. He had known that Karen was a stickler for rules, but this was something else. He had no connection to the HOA, and yet she was trying to tell him how to live his life. He shook his head and walked back to his house, the peacefulness of the lake now replaced with frustration. But he decided not to let it bother him too much. After all, it was his property, and he had every right to swim in his own lake. Little did Tom know, this would only be the beginning of his troubles with Karen. A few weeks passed after the strange encounter with Karen by the lake. Tom tried to forget about it, assuming that Karen would eventually drop the issue. After all, he had made it clear that he wasn't going to follow the HOA rules since he wasn't a member. But life has a way of throwing unexpected challenges, and Tom was about to face one. One morning, as he was having his coffee and enjoying the view from his porch, he heard a knock at the door. He opened it to find a letter on his doorstep. It wasn't a regular piece of mail, the envelope looked official, stamped with the HOA's logo. Tom felt a knot form in his stomach. He picked it up and tore open the envelope, his heart racing as he read the letter inside. It was a fine for swimming in his own lake. The letter was from the HOA, signed by Karen herself. The fine was significant, and it stated that Tom had violated the community rules by using the lake for recreational purposes. It also claimed that his actions were disruptive to the peace and order of the community. The letter gave him 30 days to pay the fine or face further action. Tom stared at the letter in disbelief. He had hoped that Karen would drop the issue, but instead, she had taken it to the next level. He had never been a part of the HOA, and he certainly wasn't going to start following their rules now. This fine made no sense to him. As Tom stood there holding the letter, he realized something: Karen was serious. She was using her position as the head of the HOA to try to force him into complying with rules that didn't even apply to him. He could feel his anger rising, but he knew that getting upset wouldn't help. He needed to take action. After some thought, Tom decided to seek legal advice. He wasn't sure what the next steps should be, but he knew he couldn't let Karen get away with this. The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. He had worked hard for his property, and no one, especially Karen, had the right to tell him what to do with it. The following day, Tom contacted Rebecca, a lawyer who had helped him with some minor legal matters in the past. He explained the situation to her, telling her about Karen's fine and the false accusations. Rebecca listened carefully, and after a brief pause, she spoke. "Tom, this is not only ridiculous but also completely illegal," Rebecca said firmly. "You are not part of the HOA. This fine is an overreach. They have no authority over your property. I can help you fight this." Tom felt a wave of relief wash over him. Having someone in his corner, someone who knew the law, made all the difference. He didn't have to deal with Karen alone. Rebecca assured him that they would take the matter to court if necessary, but she believed the HOA would back down once they realized they had no case. As soon as Tom hung up the phone, he felt a sense of determination. He wasn't going to let Karen's petty power trip ruin his life. He was going to fight back, and he was going to win. A few days later, Rebecca sent a letter to the HOA, demanding that the fine be rescinded. In her letter, she explained that Tom was not a member of the HOA and, therefore, was not subject to their rules or regulations. She also stated that if the fine was not withdrawn, they would pursue legal action. Tom waited anxiously for a response. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was ready. He could only hope that Karen would finally realize she couldn't control everything around her. Then, one afternoon, Tom came home to find a response from the HOA waiting for him. His heart sank as he opened the envelope. It was from Karen herself, and it was not the response he had hoped for. The letter was filled with anger and accusations. Karen claimed that Tom's refusal to pay the fine was a direct violation of the community's rules. She threatened to take him to court if he didn't comply and warned him that further legal action would be taken. Tom's frustration grew as he read the letter. Karen wasn't backing down. She was making it clear that she wasn't going to let him off the hook without a fight. But Tom wasn't going to back down either. He had already made up his mind to take this to court if necessary. He wasn't going to let a bully like Karen intimidate him into paying a fine he didn't deserve. As the days passed, Tom steeled himself for what was to come. He knew that the fight with Karen and the HOA wouldn't be over quickly, but he was ready. He had his lawyer, and he had the truth on his side. The next step was clear: he was going to fight back, and he wasn't going to let Karen get away with her unjust actions. The following morning, after receiving Karen's threatening letter, Tom felt a surge of determination. He had been in this situation before, where people tried to push him around, but this time, he was not going to let it slide. He was tired of being intimidated, especially by someone like Karen, who had no right to control his life. Tom sat down at his kitchen table, reviewing the letter from Karen once again. The threats of court and further legal action seemed to hang over him like a dark cloud. But instead of feeling defeated, he knew he needed to take the next step. This was not just about a fine. It was about standing up for his rights. He grabbed his phone and dialed Rebecca's number. She had been a steady presence in his life whenever he needed legal help, and now, more than ever, he was grateful for her expertise. "Hello, Tom," Rebecca answered, her voice calm and reassuring. "I got another letter from Karen," Tom said, his frustration clear. "She's threatening to take me to court if I don't pay this fine. I don't know what to do. This is getting out of hand." Rebecca listened carefully, and after a moment, she replied, "Tom, this is a classic case of someone overstepping their bounds. The HOA has no authority over your property. You've told her you're not a member, and that's the end of it. But now, we need to act." Tom took a deep breath. "What do you suggest?" "I'll draft a letter to the HOA, explaining in more detail that you're not subject to their rules," Rebecca said, her voice confident. "We'll make sure they understand that this fine is completely invalid. And if they don't back off, we'll take them to court. But I'm confident they'll back down once they realize they're in the wrong." Tom felt a sense of relief wash over him. "Thanks, Rebecca. I don't know what I'd do without you." "Don't worry, Tom. We'll get through this," Rebecca replied. Over the next few days, Rebecca worked on drafting the letter. Tom kept himself busy with work around the house, but his mind was always on the case. He had never imagined that something like this would happen. His peaceful life was now under attack because of Karen's obsession with rules and control. When Rebecca finally sent the letter to the HOA, Tom felt a weight lift from his shoulders. It was clear, firm, and to the point. In it, she outlined exactly why the fine was invalid. She pointed out that Tom was not a member of the HOA, and therefore, the organization had no legal grounds to fine him. She also made it clear that Karen's actions were not just unreasonable but also potentially illegal. Tom's heart raced as he waited for a response. He knew Karen wouldn't back down easily, but he was ready to face whatever came next. With Rebecca on his side, he felt a renewed sense of confidence. He wasn't just defending his right to swim in his own lake, he was defending his dignity. A week later, the response came. Tom opened the letter from the HOA with a mix of hope and apprehension. It was another letter from Karen, but this time, the tone was different. It was not filled with anger or threats. Instead, it was more formal, even apologetic. "Dear Mr. Tom," the letter began. "After reviewing the matter further, the HOA has decided to retract the fine that was issued. We apologize for any inconvenience caused. It was a misunderstanding regarding the boundaries of our authority. We acknowledge that you are not a member of the HOA and therefore, are not subject to our rules." Tom could hardly believe what he was reading. He reread the letter twice to make sure he hadn't missed anything. The HOA had backed down. It seemed that Rebecca's legal letter had done the trick. But as Tom continued to read, he saw something that made his stomach tighten. There was a line at the end of the letter that read, "While we have rescinded the fine, we urge you to be more considerate of the community in the future." Tom's jaw tightened. So, Karen had still managed to slip in a subtle jab. She wasn't completely admitting defeat. But it didn't matter. The fine had been rescinded, and that was the victory Tom had been hoping for. He immediately called Rebecca. "We won," he said, his voice filled with relief. "The HOA took back the fine. They apologized." "That's great news, Tom," Rebecca replied, her voice warm with satisfaction. "It looks like they realized they had no case." But be cautious. Karen might not give up that easily. Tom thanked her again and hung up, feeling a rush of triumph. He had stood his ground, and in the end, Karen's attempt to control his life had failed. But deep down, Tom knew this wasn't the last time he would hear from Karen. As much as he had won today, he couldn't shake the feeling that Karen wasn't done with him yet. Tom felt a sense of relief when the HOA rescinded the fine, but his victory was short-lived. Karen, ever determined to assert her power, was not one to admit defeat easily. A few days after receiving the retraction letter, Tom found another envelope in his mailbox. This time, it wasn't from the HOA, it was from Karen herself, but it was not the apology he had expected. The letter was a formal notice. She was taking him to court. Karen had filed a lawsuit against Tom, accusing him of causing a disturbance in the community and defying the rules of the HOA. Tom's heart sank as he read the words. It seemed Karen wasn't willing to let go of her vendetta. She wanted to make an example of him, and now, he had no choice but to fight back in a courtroom. Tom called Rebecca immediately. "I just got a letter. Karen is suing me. She won't let this go." Rebecca's voice was calm but firm. "Don't worry, Tom. This is exactly what we expected. She doesn't have a case, but we'll need to go to court to prove it. We'll show the judge that Karen has no legal standing. You've got this." Tom's nerves were on edge, but Rebecca's confidence helped calm him. He knew he was in good hands, but the thought of facing Karen in court still made him uneasy. He had never been involved in anything like this before. The day of the trial arrived, and Tom stood outside the courthouse, taking deep breaths to steady his nerves. The building loomed before him, and he couldn't help but feel small in comparison. But he wasn't going to back down. He was fighting for his right to enjoy his property, and he wasn't about to let Karen's petty actions intimidate him. Inside the courtroom, Tom and Rebecca were seated at one table, while Karen and her lawyer sat across from them. Tom couldn't help but notice the smug expression on Karen's face. She was sitting tall, as if she was already certain she would win. But Tom knew better. This was his fight, and he was going to win. The judge entered, and everyone rose in respect. The judge, a middle-aged man with a no-nonsense demeanor, took his seat and called the court to order. Karen's lawyer was the first to speak. "Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Karen Jenkins, has taken the necessary steps to protect the rules of her community. Mr. Tom here has violated the HOA's regulations by swimming in a lake that is considered part of the community. Even though Mr. Tom claims not to be a member, the HOA rules still apply to all residents who live near the community. Mrs. Jenkins is simply enforcing the law." The lawyer's words were confident, but Tom could see the holes in his argument. The lake was Tom's private property. He didn't live in the HOA's jurisdiction, and Karen's attempt to control his actions was based on nothing more than her own personal agenda. Rebecca stood up to speak, her voice steady and calm. "Your Honor, as we have pointed out in our previous letters, Mr. Tom is not a member of the HOA, and therefore, the HOA has no authority over him. The lake is on his private property, and he has every right to use it as he pleases. The fine that was issued was not only invalid, but the lawsuit itself is without merit." Tom could see the judge's interest piqued as Rebecca laid out the facts. She was methodical and precise, and her arguments were strong. It was clear she was prepared for this moment, and Tom couldn't have asked for a better lawyer. Karen's lawyer tried to counter, but his arguments only seemed to flounder as Rebecca continued to point out the contradictions in their case. Tom could feel a sense of relief beginning to build in his chest. The more Rebecca spoke, the more he believed they would win. Karen's lawyer tried one last time, speaking directly to the judge. "Your Honor, while we understand that Mr. Tom is not a member of the HOA, we ask that you consider the impact his actions have on the community. His disregard for the rules is troubling and sets a dangerous precedent for others." Rebecca rose again. "Your Honor, this case is not about community rules, It is about one person abusing their position to enforce their will over someone else's property. There is no legal standing for this lawsuit, and we request that it be dismissed immediately. The judge listened intently to both sides, his brow furrowed in concentration. After a long moment, he leaned back in his chair and spoke. I've heard enough. This case is clear. The plaintiff, Mrs. Jenkins, has no legal grounds to enforce any rules over Mr. Tom's property. This lawsuit is dismissed. I am ruling in favor of the defendant. Tom couldn't believe his ears. He had won. It was over. The judge had ruled in his favor, and Karen's efforts to control him had failed. The relief was overwhelming. Karen's face flushed with anger, her smug expression replaced by frustration. She stood up sharply, muttering under her breath. Tom, on the other hand, felt a sense of calm wash over him. He had fought back, and justice had prevailed. As Tom left the courtroom, he glanced at Rebecca, who gave him a small but knowing smile. That's how it's done, she said. Tom grinned, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. It wasn't just about the win, it was about standing up for himself and showing Karen that she couldn't push him around. After the courtroom victory, Tom felt a rush of relief. The weight that had been pressing down on him for weeks was finally lifted. Karen had lost. The case was dismissed, and Tom had stood up for himself in a way he never expected to. As he left the courthouse with Rebecca, he couldn't stop smiling. But as he walked to his car, he noticed something. Karen's lawyer, still sitting at his table, shot him an irritated glance before quickly looking away. Tom couldn't help but feel a little satisfied. He had won, and that meant something not just for him, but for everyone who had ever been pushed around by someone like Karen. Rebecca turned to him. You did great in there, Tom. You stood your ground, and the judge saw through everything Karen was trying to do. Thanks, Rebecca, Tom said, his voice full of gratitude. I couldn't have done this without you. I really appreciate all your help. She smiled. It's what I do. I'm just glad we got it sorted. Tom's mind was still spinning from the day's events. He was ready to put the whole thing behind him, but deep down, he had a feeling that this wasn't the end. Karen wasn't someone who would easily accept defeat. As the days passed, Tom went back to his normal routine. He swam in his lake, worked around his property, and enjoyed the peace and quiet he had fought so hard to protect. But there was an unease he couldn't shake. He had won in court, but Karen wasn't someone who just let things go. Her pride was too big for that. A week later, Tom received another letter. This one, however, was different from the last. It was not from Karen or the HOA. Instead, it came from the office of a private investigator. The letter was brief but clear. Karen had been gathering evidence, hoping to take the case to a higher court. She wasn't finished. She was determined to make Tom's life difficult, no matter what. Tom sighed as he read the letter. It seemed that Karen had not learned her lesson. But this time, Tom was prepared. He wasn't going to let her keep wasting his time or resources. He was done playing her game. He called Rebecca the moment he finished reading the letter. She's still not giving up. Apparently, Karen has hired a private investigator to look into me and find something she can use against me. Rebecca's response was calm but firm. This is just another desperate attempt on her part, Tom. We've already won in court. She has no case. But she's stubborn, and she thinks she can wear you down. Don't let her. If she wants to waste her time and money, that's on her. But we're ready for whatever comes next. Tom felt some comfort in Rebecca's words. She was right. Karen had no case. But as much as he tried to brush it off, he couldn't help but feel a little uneasy. The idea that someone was actively spying on him made him feel exposed, like he was always being watched. He decided to take action, but not out of fear. He was going to make sure that Karen understood the cost of her actions. He wasn't just going to let her continue with her crusade. Tom contacted his lawyer, prepared to take steps to protect himself and his property. Rebecca advised him to gather all the documents and evidence that showed his ownership of the land and the lake. He also needed to keep track of any more attempts Karen made to harass him. If she kept this up, it could turn into harassment, and that was something he could legally pursue. Days turned into weeks, and Karen's actions grew bolder. She started showing up near Tom's property again, taking pictures from the edge of the woods. Tom was beginning to feel like a prisoner in his own home, always looking over his shoulder. But he wasn't afraid. He knew what he had to do. Rebecca filed a restraining order against Karen, arguing that her actions were crossing the line into harassment. The court agreed, and Karen was given a formal warning. The restraining order meant that Karen could no longer approach Tom's property or take any further legal actions against him without permission from the court. When Karen received the news about the restraining order, she was furious. Tom could almost hear her angry voice in his head. She had tried everything she could to control his life, and now, it seemed, she had finally run out of options. For the first time in months, Tom felt a sense of peace. The constant worry that Karen would continue to find ways to make his life miserable had been lifted. He had stood up for himself, and now it was over. Karen's efforts had not only failed, they had backfired. She had pushed too far, and now, the consequences were on her. Tom could finally return to his quiet life, the one he had always wanted. He swam in his lake without a second thought, knowing that he was free to enjoy his property as he saw fit. After the restraining order was issued, Tom finally felt a sense of relief that had eluded him for so long. Karen's constant interference in his life had taken a toll on his peace of mind. He no longer had to worry about her showing up unexpectedly or trying to find new ways to challenge him. With the legal protections in place, Tom could focus on what truly mattered, enjoying his property and his life. Tom spent the next few weeks getting back to his routine. He spent more time on his land, working on small improvements and spending peaceful afternoons by the lake. The stress that had clouded his thoughts for so long began to lift. He felt a weight off his shoulders, and for the first time in months, he could truly relax. Despite the victory, however, Tom knew that Karen wasn't likely to stay quiet forever. Her pride had been wounded, and people like Karen didn't take defeat well. But for now, Tom felt confident in the knowledge that he had the law on his side. He had stood up to her, and he had won. One evening, as the sun was setting over the lake, Tom received an unexpected visitor. He was out near the water, enjoying the warm evening air, when he saw a car pull up at the end of his driveway. It was an unfamiliar vehicle, but Tom wasn't concerned. He had become accustomed to unexpected visits from people who had heard about the recent events. As the car stopped, Tom saw Rebecca step out, wearing a friendly smile. She was the last person he expected to see, but he was glad to see her all the same. "Hey, Tom," Rebecca greeted him warmly. "Mind if I join you for a bit?" Tom grinned, happy to see her. "Not at all. What brings you out here?" Rebecca walked toward him, looking relaxed. "I just wanted to check in. How are things going? I know things got pretty tense with Karen, and I wanted to make sure you're doing okay." Tom chuckled softly. "Honestly, I'm doing better than I've been in a while. I've been getting back to normal, enjoying the quiet. It's been nice." Rebecca nodded, her eyes glancing out over the water. "I'm glad to hear that. You know, I've been hearing some things around town. People are talking about what happened." Tom raised an eyebrow. "Oh? What are they saying?" Rebecca smiled. "Mostly, they're impressed by how you handled the whole thing. You really stood up for yourself, and I think people are starting to realize that Karen went too far. It's not every day that someone challenges the HOA head like that." Tom felt a sense of pride. He hadn't done it for recognition, but it felt good to know that others saw the situation for what it was. He had been pushed too far, and he had pushed back in the right way. "I never expected it to get this far," Tom admitted. "I thought Karen would drop it after the fine was rescinded. But she just kept coming after me." Rebecca leaned back on a nearby rock. "Some people can't take defeat. But I think what happened here sent a message. You weren't the only one who felt the pressure from her. She had a lot of people worried. Now, I think they're seeing that standing up to her was the right thing to do." Tom nodded. "I wasn't going to let her push me around. Not on my own land." They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, enjoying the tranquility of the lake. Tom felt grateful for Rebecca's support. She had been there every step of the way, guiding him through the legal complexities and helping him fight back against Karen. Without her, he wasn't sure how he would have navigated the whole ordeal. Rebecca stood up after a while, brushing the dirt from her clothes. "Well, I just wanted to make sure everything was going smoothly for you. You've earned the peace and quiet you're getting." Tom smiled. "I appreciate that. Thanks for everything, Rebecca. You really helped me through this." Rebecca grinned and waved him off. "No need to thank me. You did all the hard work. I'm just glad it worked out in your favor. And who knows? Maybe we'll be seeing less of Karen now." Tom chuckled at the thought. "I wouldn't be surprised if she finds some other way to cause trouble. But at least now I know how to handle her." Rebecca smiled. "That's the spirit. Take care, Tom. I'll be in touch." As she got back into her car and drove away, Tom felt a deep sense of gratitude. The road to victory had been difficult, but in the end, he had stood his ground. He had defended his rights and proven that no one could take his peace away without consequences. That evening, as the stars began to twinkle above the lake, Tom realized that the struggle had taught him something valuable: the importance of standing up for what was right, no matter how hard it seemed. He was no longer the quiet man who let things slide. He was someone who would fight for his home and his life.